Dr. Jill Stein, welcome back to the show. It's so great to see you.
It's really great to see you, Kim.
Okay, so you look like you're traveling right now. Can you tell us where you are?
Yeah, I'm in New York City. I'm in Brooklyn at a supporter's home, and we are in the ballot fight right now. This is the last stand of the empire in their effort to keep grassroots campaigns off the ballot.
It's so ridiculous that candidates have to secure these ballots, and I guess it's like I don't know. What is the solution? I mean, if we say, okay, there's no criteria to be on the ballot, right? Then and anybody could put their name on, we would end up maybe with a huge ballot, right? With thousands of people that just throw their name in. Should there be some sort of criteria? And if so, what should it be? What's more realistic versus what you're having to do, the other candidates don't have to do? Right, you don't have the Republican candidate doesn't have to do what you're doing. The Democrat candidate doesn't have to do what you're doing, which is unfair. So what do you think it should be?
Yeah, I mean, our system is ridiculous. Basically, if you are part of the machine, if you are a Democrat or a Republican, you are grandfathered in. You have to
Yeah.
compete within your party, and that's fine. And then you're automatically on. It shouldn't be that way. There needs to be there needs to be a reasonable threshold so that you shouldn't have to be, the political elite in order to get on the ballot,
Yeah.
or the economic elite. Because right now you can buy your way on, and if you have oodles of money, you can hire petitioners and you can attain these ridiculous requirements. In New York City, in New York State, they tripled the requirement. And that was done in a budget bill as a secret hidden provision. So there was no discussion or debate. New Yorkers, like everybody everywhere, wants more choices, especially, in the current election. But as a rule, it's been growing over decades that people want to have more choices, not just be limited to the two parties of war and Wall Street, basically. And so Governor Cuomo secretly inserted into a budget bill this increase in the requirement from 15,000, which is high,
Mhm.
15,000 signatures in 6 weeks. If it's 1,000, okay, that's reasonable. It's reasonable to have to show that you have some support
Right.
in order to get on the ballot.
So they were able to just triple the requirement. Who made that decision? Who and how do they across? How do they go about making that type of decision?
So it was buried in a budget bill, and often these budget bills are humongous. And, we don't pass legislation anymore as a rule. We just jam everything into
Yeah.
one budget bill a year. That's kind of how Congress works, and that's how state legislatures work, because we don't really have a functioning democracy. We don't actually debate things. The public is not informed. We have consolidated corporate media. So, which is largely in service of careerism as opposed to, the public interest. So the whole system is dysfunctional on every count. We are shadow banned to start with because, the system doesn't like me at all. I'm classified with WikiLeaks on Twitter and presumably on the rest of social media as well. I'm considered a threat, and I'm proud of that. And I think that's why mainstream media is going to use any excuse whatsoever not to cover us. And that's why we've got to be on the ballot in New York. We have to be a full bore challenge to empire and oligarchy, which is throwing all of us under the bus. Genocide is a red line for a lot of people, and it should
Yeah.
be. And endless war should also be. And wars that are approaching nuclear, conflicts on three fronts right now, at least, could all go nuclear in the blink of an eye. And our
Right.
leadership, our criminal misleadership, is absolutely clueless about these dangers. And we, the American people, are being impoverished. If at the blink of an eye, we're throwing another 60 billion to Ukraine, throwing fuel on that fire, which could have been avoided altogether had the U.S. not been ginning this up. And likewise in Israel's war on Gaza, which is not really a war, it's a massacre.
No. Right.
It's a
Right.
massacre of civilians. This is horrific. Every hour that goes by is really, we're on a death watch. We are on a death watch for 2 million people right now who do not have food or water, and for whom the supply has been totally choked off for the last 10 days. And everybody's malnourished, everybody's incredibly stressed, and they're under bombardment, and they don't have shelter, they don't have sanitation. It's just nothing short of miraculous that people survive.
You are the only major candidate who is against the Zionist agenda that's going on right now and the genocide in Gaza. Why do you think that is?
Oh man. Well, I think, as Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Defense said back in the 1980s, Israel is the unsinkable battleship for the United States in the Middle East, basically overseeing, control over that very important source of oil. And, this is U.S. expressed military policy, expressed Pentagon policy, so-called full spectrum dominance, that the U.S. will dominate all basically all substantial resources and all areas of competition for resources around the world, and that we will dominate all domains, that is outer space, cyberspace, battle, potential
Yeah,
land battles, the sea, the subsea. We will dominate full spectrum here. And we will not allow even regional powers to rise to regional prominence, because we have to have total control. Now, how is that working out for us? We have lost every battle starting back in the 1960s, when we
mhm,
flagrantly lost Vietnam and murdered some 3 million Vietnamese as part of that battle, and others, in Cambodia and so on. We've had this horrific imperial policy, and Israel is sort of a settler colonial
mhm,
state, which is very much allied with U.S. interests. And this is a shame, because Palestine, the traditional Palestine, and Jerusalem was multicultural, multi-religious. Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived peacefully side by side until the Zionists came with the intention of practicing ethnic cleansing. That's not to
yeah,
say that every immigrant who came, fleeing pogroms of the
right,
Holocaust and the aftermath, that's not to say this was their intention, but the organizers,
yeah,
the terrorist groups, the Jewish terrorist groups, who went around, bombing the King David Hotel, for example, in Jerusalem, where a hundred, Brits and others, Westerners and others, were all murdered in a specific event that was designed to terrorize, at that point, particularly Great Britain, but also, there was a terrorist campaign designed to drive out the Palestinians. Now, that was not widely known, although that's what the Palestinians have always said. But their experience was validated by the National Israeli Archives and the military records, which showed indeed, and there was a whole new generation of Israeli historians which did their work starting in the 1990s, that completely overturned the basic presumptions about Zionism, that it was a land without a people and a people without a land. This was a marriage made in heaven. They were going to make the desert bloom. Not true at all on every score. And that was shown through Israel's own records that were declassified in the 1990s, showing that there was basically an intentional plan to move out the local population. And that's what's happened over and over, village by village. They were burned, or the inhabitants were driven out, their crops were burned, their olive trees were burned. And there were massacres that began even before the state of Israel was formally declared. So that's where the conflict began. And, it's out of that conflict that eventually, October 7th was just the latest skirmish
yeah,
of a massacred population to fight back. And what Israel has committed since October the 7th is just so totally over the top. It's pathetic that Hamas, continues to be this justification of the slaughter of thousands of children who are being tortured and murdered on an industrial scale. Every day, 37 children lose their mothers. This is a civilian death. I was just, at this conference, Doctors Against Genocide, last week, this really amazing conference that included lots of people who've actually been there and worked there. And,
mhm,
you can see this in the podcasts as well, of the healthcare providers, who haven't been targeted yet and murdered, which is also going on here, and that itself is a war crime, the destruction of the healthcare system. But who they are taking care of, it's entirely civilians. They are not, and it's mostly children and women.
Yeah.
So it's outrageous that this mythology that there is a war
Yeah.
going on, is that anyone gives that any attention whatsoever. What went before the International Court of Justice, and you had 13 out of 15 judges all saying that, this is plausible genocide, which is the most definitive you can ever be about a genocide until after the fact, and you have
Right.
all the evidence. This is as definitive as it gets. And, it's not only the Palestinians, it's also Israelis who are really in the target hairs here, because even their traditional allies, Egypt, for example, who joined the case, and Egypt was
Mhm.
also threatening to tear apart their peace treaty with Israel in advance of the assault on the Rafah Gate. So, there may be some mixed messages coming out of Egypt, but there's an awful lot of discontent. And the same is true in Jordan, where there have been huge rallies now also demanding that Jordan end its peace treaty with Israel. You've got an active hot war going on with Lebanon. You have, between Israel and the U.S., some 5 countries, including Iran, which is actually being targeted. Iran is networked with Russia, which obviously, they have a military alliance, and Russia obviously has, nuclear weapons. This could go ballistic. This is like a
Right.
pre-World War I situation with nuclear weapons thrown into the mix. So this puts us all in the target hairs of the violence, because once you got a nuclear war, it doesn't matter where it happens. Nuclear winter is terminal for us all. So, our leaders are so clueless, so uninformed, so, subservient to their war profiteer and APAC masters, that, they're all just going full speed ahead, voting unanimously for the latest appropriations to keep the futile and horrific war going in Ukraine, where there should have been, what Russia wanted was neutrality. That
Right.
should have been in the cards and on the table from the get-go. The same thing. This war in the Middle East threatens everyone in the region, especially Israelis and
Right.
all of us potentially. So it's up to us as the American people. As Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. We have to be that demand. And we can do that knowing that the American people are behind this demand. It's not just the United Nations. It's not just world opinion. It's also the opinion of the American people, who want an immediate ceasefire and a diplomatic solution by substantial and growing majorities. That's what the students were standing up for when they got their heads bashed in, what the majority of the American people say. So we have to stand up for that, and we have to
Mhm.
stand up for that in this election. If our campaign isn't in the race, it will not be discussed in this election, because they all agree it's full speed ahead on these disastrous war policies that are endangering all of us and impoverishing us here in the US, where it consumes, this endless war machine consumes half of our congressional budget. So this is just nuts. We can put it to an end simply by standing up with the courage of our convictions and taking a lesson here from the young people who've always led the charge on significant political change and social change. We need to follow their example and stand up and demand an end to this, including in the voting booth. By getting us on the ballot in New York, it is a shot across the bow of the empire and oligarchy that
Yeah.
their days are numbered, and that they better start moving now.
I don't think the political elites in Washington are clueless. I mean, I think they know exactly what they're allowing to have happen. I think that they just believe that, for one reason or another, whether it's that they're bought off and they're just kowtowing to their donors, or if they're God-fearing in a way and they believe that this is just biblical prophecy, revelations that are coming to pass, or whatever their reasoning. I think they're fully aware of the atrocities that Israel's committing in Gaza against the Palestinian people, and they're fully aware of what they've been doing for decades to the Palestinian people. But they, for whatever reason, just that to them is not a red line. Genocide, unfortunately, is not or attempted genocide is not a red line for a lot of these political elite. It's really frustrating. I can understand, I guess, Joe Biden, and I could understand Joe Biden, okay, him being pro-Israel and letting them do whatever they want because he's been entrenched in politics for so long, bought off by the lobbies, right? That's that. Trump, that's like is why is he such a pro-Israel guy? I don't know if his campaign needs the I I, it's kind of confounding. Like the only thing I could think of is that they shower him with so much praise. You know, they give him, and he loves himself a lot. So, and they give him all these like, oh, you're basically the next Messiah. Is almost what they just sugar him up to where he's like, okay, anything for Israel because they're so nice to me. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I don't know. I mean, that one is just maybe a super PAC is funded by what's his face, that one real crazy rabbi Shmuley. I mean, I don't know, what is going on there. You're the only one who's speaking up against what Israel's doing. So I mean, what is it? Are you just the lone anti-Semite, the lone Jewish anti-Semite? Is that you? I mean, it's just
Uh,
insane, but that's what they would paint you as, right?
I think they'll try. Right now they just mostly seem to be ignoring me and hoping that we'll get stopped and we won't be on the ballot. So that seems to be what they're doing now.
You
I
should call
actually,
them anti-Semitic. You should like turn the tables on them and
oh
say,
yeah,
so you're going to ignore the only Jewish person in hey, I thought we were supposed to be pro-Jew right now. I thought we were really, like how could you, I don't know, turn the tables on them somehow.
oh yeah. I mean, I think they're just terrified that our voice will be in the mix. And it's not only about Israel; it's about you know
Everything.
everything. It's about wages. It's about, the living paycheck to paycheck. It's about student debt. It's about, the bailouts for Wall Street while Main Street got thrown out. It's healthcare as a human right. It's everything. They're quaking in their boots. Um, and I think they're kind of afraid that of giving any publicity to a Jewish candidate that opposes the genocide in Gaza. I think they're kind of terrified about that because that's the position of the American people. So they don't even want to recognize me as an opponent. There's this saying, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win, once
Yeah.
they get to that point. And I think when they are shadow banning you and when they are blocking you from media coverage, you're close to winning. And the numbers tell it all because they're going to be three pro-genocide, pro-war candidates on the ballot, and we'll be the only anti-genocide, anti-war candidate. So when you have three candidates who are
Yeah.
basically splitting the pro-war vote, and one campaign which is unifying the pro-worker, anti-war vote, that's a potential win. And you can win a four-way race with as little as 26% of the vote. So this is a really unique election in which there are three, legitimate, strong, rather pro-war, pro-genocide candidates that can all be splitting that vote. And that's why they're all really quaking in their boots that we get on the ballot. Because if we do, this
Then
election
there's an
turned
option.
on its head.
Yeah. Then
Totally.
there's finally an option that's not the pro-genocide. To me, it is absolutely a red line. It is a red line. I don't care if I agree with a candidate on every other issue, which I don't with any of the others. But even if I did, I this is the red line for me. And it should be for all Americans. I feel like we were taught since birth after World War II to never again allow something like this to happen. It has made us proud, even as Americans, to have World War II and to have said that we went in and we helped rescue the Jewish people from the Holocaust. Like that is something that we're proud of. That is something that we have hung our hat on as being the good guys. And yet here we are now. To me, that is the make or break moment. It's always the question of if I were there at that time in Europe during those days, would I have sheltered Jews from the Nazis? Would I have done that? Would I have opened up my home and opened up my basement and hid Jews? I like to think that I would have. That's how I like. That's how I view myself,
Mhm.
and I think a lot of Americans view themselves that way. They view that they would be the ones that would have opened up their cellars to the Jewish people if they would have been in Germany at that time. But now this happens when you've got another group of people that are being slaughtered. It's not a war, like you said. I do not. A war is a war between two nations that are armed, that have militaries. The Palestinians are not allowed militaries. They have these civilian militia groups that kind of have formed and risen up to try to protect themselves in resistance. But they're not equal militaries at all. It's just an onslaught. And now it's kind of like we're in that moment where that moral character is being tested for people. Are they opening up their cellars and are they hiding the Jews? And in this case, it's, are you continuing to support the slaughter of these people and are you speaking up against it, or are you just turning a blind eye and saying anything for Israel? I mean, this is the moment.
And what we're doing in Gaza and Palestine, because it's not just Gaza, it generalizes, and it's international law that we are overturning here, and it's human rights, and this doesn't stay in this doesn't stay in Gaza, So it's like, as Gaza goes, we all go. Are we going to stand up and defend international law and human rights here? Because it's clearly against international law, and it's not only the genocide, it's the ethnic cleansing, it is the occupation, which is against UN resolutions after resolution, and it is the apartheid state of Israel that are all against international law.
Yeah.
So we can't allow this to go on, especially, we have been top dog. We as the US have been top dog since the Second World War, not through our great success, but mostly because our competitors were all, bashed in the Second World War and their economies were decimated. So we emerged as the guerrilla economy coming out of the Second World War. And we have been that leadership until, the last 5 years or so, when China, Russia, India, and we've been driving China and Russia, by the way, into each other's arms. This is exactly what Henry Kissinger, was terrified about, that we would be unifying a global opposition against us. And that's what we're doing right now. Two of our hottest battlefronts, are on the border of Russia and China right now. And we've been basically ginning up conflicts here. And meanwhile, you have this BRICS alliance, Brazil, and the others, India as well, and South Africa, and now some of the Middle Eastern countries as well. They are a very powerful economic unit, and they have crossed our curve. They are the leading economic force now in the globe, and they continue to expand. So we cannot continue to operate like we are the sole, unopposed, full spectrum dominant power. We can't keep behaving like the bully in the schoolyard. We
Right.
need to start supporting international law and human rights. It's like 13 American colonies. We were individual colonies, but at some point, we got together and we began operating as a unit and then became a very powerful unit. Well, we have to do that, and the UN is a step in that direction, but it needs reforms. It should not be dominated by those who happen to be the power holders coming out of the Second World War. So the UN needs to be more, more small d democratic in its operations.
Yeah.
But that's where we need to go, and we need to rely on that. If it's just the rules-based order, where it's the dominant power making up the rules as you go along as to what's convenient, then we're going to bear the brunt of that system when we're no longer, contending to be the dominant power, which we're not for very
Yeah.
long. And so we're kind of writing our own epitaph here if we don't get with the program, because it's either the laws of nations or it's the law of the jungle, in which case
Yeah.
whoever is the dominator will be, practicing its own genocide and ethnic cleansing as it wants. So it's really time for us to demand, an America that works for Americans and a world that works for all of us, because it's not going to work for us as America unless the larger world is working. And right now it is on a trajectory towards doomsday, whether you're looking at, this crashing economy, this sort of the oligarch economy, which serves the upper 10% really well, but everybody else is kind of being driven down. Whether you're looking at the climate crisis, which does continue to, explode on us, It's not getting a lot of attention right now because 2 million lives on the line is pretty compelling. But there's, really horrific developments that are continuing to proceed apace, superstorms, heat waves, heat records, um, the melting of Antarctica, which is extremely alarming.
Mhm.
There's this so-called doomsday ice sheet, the Thwaites Glacier, which could unleash 2 feet of water. We don't know when, but it's about to lose its backstop, this glacier that can slide into the ocean and raise sea level 2 feet. It's about to lose the its shelf, which is like its break. And will it melt in a decade or
Mhm.
in a century? But it's accelerating rapidly, and this is 2 feet, which is going to be
Mhm.
devastating to Florida and Manhattan and Pakistan and countries all around the world. This too,
Yeah.
50 million refugees uh, that are expected by mid-century from climate alone.
Yeah.
So, we're kind of crashing and burning here. Empire and oligarchy are not working, and it's really come home in the budgets that people can't meet, in the rent that people can't pay. It's
Right.
enough of letting the oligarchs run the show here. It's enough of allowing our democracy to be militarized because the Israeli occupation forces are now training our police forces as well, and it's a favor to the military contractors that the military is now passing its equipment on down to our communities, which now have tanks and armored vehicles and drones out in the community,
Yeah.
bashing the heads of peaceful protesters. This is not the way. This is not what democracy looks like, and we have a chance to change that now. And people want to change that. And this is our time to stand up and demand an America that works for all of us.